今天是莱布尼兹与牛顿系列演讲最后一场的报告。那今天是由通识中心琅元教授主讲。琅元教授他是苏联莫斯科科学院的数学史博士，后来他到巴黎做博士后，之后呢，他曾经在加拿大、香港。然后最后才到我们清华大学，所以呢，琅元老师他不仅仅是在国际学术上非常享有盛名，而且在教育上也非常的认真出色。那我就不多做介绍。今天呢，我们请琅元老师来讲有关牛顿他的编年史的研究，因为大家都知道，牛顿在科学上的一些成就跟努力，可是呢，我们比较没有注意到他在历史方面的研究，所以呢，今天我们琅元老师要跟大家一起来探讨牛顿这个比较鲜为人知的面向，可是他的历史研究其实还是跟他的科学研究有非常密切的关联的。好，那我不浪费琅元老师的时间，我先把时间交给琅元老师，谢谢。
谢谢。Good evening, everybody, and let us start this lecture. I don't know if you heard about works of Isaac Newton in the field of chronology. Well, I'm sorry, I will speak English, so I will try to do it slowly. But this is one of the most mysterious and interesting parts of Newton's work. We in this slide see some phrases, some words said about Newton by this lady, Betty Jo Titter Dobbs, who spent a lot of time studying heritage of Newton. She said it became a curious anomaly and one to be explained in a way that Newton's studies in astronomy, optics, and mathematics only occupied a small portion of his time. In fact, most of his great powers were poured out upon church history, theology, the chronology of ancient kingdoms, prophecy, and alchemy. So I think in this series of lectures you heard already about some of these interesting fields in which Newton made contributions, especially alchemy and theology. But until now you probably have not heard anything about his work in the field of chronology. Why chronology? What is so special about it? So if we look at this publication produced by George Gray, originally published in 1888, he tried to systematize all the contributions of Newton and classify them. You can see that oh, this is a mistake, I see right away, probably because the format was changed. Sorry. So here we can see, okay, I will put like this. So we can see here that he mentions the works of Newton devoted to chronology. Chronology is grouped together with theological and miscellaneous works. So according to George Gray, this field was had to be placed even after minor works of Newton, so it was not very important. But in my lecture I will try to show you that this work actually interested Newton a lot. He spent a lot of time to this research, and he published important works in this field. So here you can see that Gray listed two works on chronology, and the first of them, well, I see only one of them. It's probably mistaken this slide. So here he listed this book published in 1728, actually 1 year after Newton's death, which was titled The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended. Amended means corrected, to which is prefixed a short chronicle from the first memory of things in Europe to the conquest of Persia by Alexander the Great. So these are the two works combined together. One publication, but two works. Also, we learned that Newton worked on chronology for not for just 1 year or 2 years. He lost for the last 40 years of his life. So he indeed spent a lot of time, a lot of energy on this topic. And some authors suggested that he produced 80 manuscript versions of the first chapter of his work on chronology. So this is really impressive, and we know that Newton was a great scholar and he made very important discoveries in several fields. So what made him work so hard on this topic? Why chronology? Why chronology is important? Why it's interesting? What is so special about it? So here in this slide I show you the publication. You can see the date when it was published. So it's 1728. So this is the moment when he already passed away. This is the work published posthumously, means after his death. And this book is, it's available online, so you can actually find it. And this book contained two parts, which I already mentioned, but I will mention again. First of them is the so-called short chronicle. Short chronicle, short chronological description of things in Europe to the conquest of Persia by Alexander the Great. So this is a relatively short text, it's just 42 pages. And the rest of this book is the second work of Newton, which is titled The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms Amended. So it's a much longer text, it's more than 300 pages long. So actually we can consider this short chronicle, the first work, as a short abstract of his studies, which he wrote for Princess Caroline of Brandenburg-Ansbach in 1717 on her request. We will speak about this and you will see the picture of this princess. So this short chronicle is just a list. You can see it's indeed short, 40 pages. It's a list containing dates of historical events which happened in several places in the world. And these dates differ considerably from the dates accepted by scientists before Newton. So the short chronicle begins with these words: the great antiquities are full of poetical fictions. It means that the descriptions of history, of ancient history, do not contain reliable information. They are more like poems, beautiful stories which don't have true contents behind. Because the Greeks wrote nothing in prose before the conquest of Asia by Cyrus the Persian. This is the great king of Persia. Then Pericides Sirius and Cadmus Meletius introduced the writing in prose. So this is the very beginning of his text, which means that until a certain moment, the texts of Greeks, in particular texts about their history, are not reliable. He goes on to describe how the first Greek histories were written. According to him, the first historical works of Greeks were based on the historical and genealogical records available to them. Well, we can imagine that. And these records, actually we don't know much about them. They included some unidentified genealogies, ages of succession of priestesses of Juno, lists of kings, of archons of Athens. Archons means rulers, of like mayors of city-states. And later, the reckoning by Olympiads, you know that Olympiads started in ancient Greece, and they were repeated regularly. So sometimes people were counting years using Olympiads, right? So it was a quite complex system. And according to Newton, as I just mentioned in the beginning, some part of it was not reliable. The only question is which part is not reliable, and second question is how to find the truth. He continues. He is saying the reigns of kings, reigns of period when the king was in power, were yet set down by numbers of years. Arundelian marbles, here he mentions a lot of things we don't know about actually. They are not very famous now. I will explain to you next slides what he's talking about. He's just given lists of these sources which he analyzed. So Arundelian marbles were composed 60 years after the death of Alexander the Great, and yet mention not the Olympiads. But in the next Olympiad, Timoeus Siculus published in history, it's not misprint, it's the way of people wrote in Old English, in several books, down to his own times, according to the Olympiads, comparing the Ephori, the kings of Sparta, the archons of Athens, and the priestesses of Argos. Again, we have no idea what he's talking about, right? With the Olympic victors, so as to make the Olympiads and the genealogies and successions of kings, archons, and priestesses and poetical histories suit with one another, means fit with each other, so there is no contradiction in them, according to the best of his judgment. And where he left off, Polybius began and carried on the history. So here he is given the his reconstruction, how the history was written. And well, it shows actually already, this text of Newton shows that he was not some kind of amateur who was just reading a little bit about this. It shows that he went really deeply into the matter, into the all these sources, and he knew quite well his primary sources. Now, what are the people he's talking about? So, archons, or in plural archons, is a Greek word that means ruler. So he was talking about rulers. And there are several different definitions of this term, because in different time periods the function was changed. But anyways, we can say it's somebody who is occupying high position in some public office. So second thing he mentioned in this paragraph is Arundel marbles. These marbles are a collection of carved ancient Greek sculptures and inscriptions collected by this man, whose name was Thomas Howard, Earl of Arundel. So he was a noble man, aristocratic man, who was collecting antiquities. So this is one of the pieces belonging to this group of marbles he collected. So it's now in Oxford. So if you go to Oxford, try to find this thing. So it's Sphinx, as you can see. So half lion, half lady. So he had a large collection of antique sculpture, in mostly Roman, but including some that he excavated in Greek world. And this collection was the most important in England. So this particular man, he had the largest collection of antiquities in England at that time. After his death, this collection was dispersed, and some part was given to Oxford University, so it's still in Oxford. Some of these are not works of art, but actually important inscriptions. And here you can see one of such inscriptions in this slide. So this is the so-called Parian Chronicle, found on Paros, island called Paros. And this chronicle contains dates of Greek history from 1582 before Christ to 354 before Christ. And you can see here in this slide, you can see the original object. You can see that this is a table. Well, you don't see it very clearly, it's old. But this this object is preserved now in Greece, on the island of Paros. So as you can see here, it contains small portion of history which he is not mentioning here, because at that time he was not aware of this piece. But the rest of tables look like this. So the marbles combine dates for events which modern readers would consider mythic. So to modern researchers, the dates of many events are not true because events are not true. They belong to mythology. For example, the flood. We cannot really believe that there was a flood. So for the Greeks, the events of the distant past, such as the Trojan War, which took place according to traditional chronology in the 13th century BC, and the travel of Argonauts, these things for Greeks were historical things, not mythology. So for them it was like story of ancient times. So Parian inscriptions they paid more attention to this heroic age than to the events which we call real. So here another person, two other persons he is mentioning. So this Ephorus was an ancient Greek historian who wrote universal history. He wrote 29 books, and this collection was completed by his son. So altogether were 30 books. So Ephori mentioned by Newton means father and son, actually. So this contained a summary of sacred war and other narratives from the very old days of Greek history to 340 BC. So altogether, the big span of time was covered, about 700 years. Another book text he's mentioning is this Timaeus. It's the name of a historian who was born to a rich family in what is now Sicily. Now Sicily is not Greece, it's part of Italy, but at that time Sicily was part of Greek world. So he was one of the most influential historians. Now, this is the statue of Polybius, another famous historian, but I cannot be sure that this is not a later copy or even a fake copy. I couldn't find good picture of statue of Polybius. So Newton, well, now we return back to Newton. Newton, his short chronicle, his short text, is constructed as a list of events which took in several parts of the ancient world. So he begins with the most ancient events. So the first event happens around 1125 BC. And at that moment, according to Newton, inhabitants of Palestine, which is more or less modern Israel, you can think like this, Israel and Palestine in present day, they were pushed by Jewish leader Joshua to Egypt. So then he describes the events which took place in Egypt, in Near East, including Babylon, but also in Greece. And of course, Greece, as I said, at that time included southern Italy. So he covers this Mediterranean, we can say Eastern Mediterranean area plus Mesopotamia, so present-day Iraq. So present-day Iraq, Syria, Greece, part of Italy, Egypt, this area. So he is especially interested in this because the events described in the Bible, they happened more or less in this area. So his focus is the Bible, is the history described in the Bible. He tries to understand, obviously, if the history told to us in the Bible is true or not true. And if it's true, is it narrated, told exactly, or it should be modified. And there are some inconsistencies with the dates. So here, one thing which immediately is surprising for the reader, that is not he only trying to correct the text which he is reading, but he tries to make the chronology considerably shorter. So this is very, very interesting, and usually when historians, true historians, Newton is not really a true historian, but when historians deal with their materials, they don't try to change the chronology. They just accept the chronologies already built by their precursors. But here we can see that Newton suddenly pays attention, a lot of attention, to the chronology, to the dates in which events happened. So he, he's not explaining why he's doing this, but some modern historians of Newton's work think that maybe he was doing it because he saw that many chronological reports, we can say, or records do not really fit well into the story in the Bible. So Bible contradicts to historical records, or historical records contradict the Bible. And he was not happy about this, so he tried to find the reason why and tried to correct something. Of course, he cannot correct the Bible. It's not, that's what he never tried to do, but he tried to instead to correct the chronologies. So he actually tries to say that Bible doesn't contain contradictions as far as the historical materials are concerned. He tries to remove chronological contradictions and make everything consistent. So in some cases he goes not only to historical texts but also to myths. Right? So as I said, the main goal of Newton was to design actually a reduction of Egyptian and Greek chronologies, because some of them looked like very long. Like Egypt existed before the creation of the world, because at that time creation of the world was about 6,000 years or even less before the time of Newton. Okay, so in his work, Newton assumes that the chronological information coming from all these sources, Egyptian, Greek, Roman sources, are sometimes unreliable. And they are produced on the basis of imagination of some authors and cannot be trusted. So in his opinion, the very long history of ancient world should be reduced, should be compressed to fit into the true chronology. So he wants to make fit the chronology of all these kingdoms and the chronology of the Bible. So the first, actually he used just two ways to do it, two methods. First modification was related to the count by generations. In many sources, people don't really give like exact dates of life of some persons. But they mention that, for example, one person lived in the next generation. For example, you live in the next generation from my generation. Right? You are young, I'm older. So in ancient texts, very often they count by generations. And it seems that later historians who try to reconstruct the chronology, they used a very simple way. They said, okay, we count 3 generations for 1 century. So if in some text there are mentions of 3 generations of people like grandfather, father, and son, means that this group of people lived within 1 century. So Newton actually was not happy about this. I mean, he said it's not very realistic. In reality, generation should be shorter, and he suggested to reduce 1 generation to about 20 years, which corresponds more or less to reality actually, because at that time, I don't know, now the situation changed, but also many people now get married and have children before age of 30, especially 33, right? So at that time, many people got married and got children already at the age of 20 or even earlier. So it would be reasonable to count say 18 to 20 years per generation. It looks not a very big deal, but actually it kind of reduces the whole duration of chronology for 1/3. So more than 30% of the length of the periods will be removed, right? The second method, which is very interesting to some of you, people who study exact sciences and may be interested in astronomy, is astronomical method. It's based on astronomical information. This method, we will later speak about possible origins of this idea. It was probably not Newton's own original idea. He borrowed it from somebody. But to understand this method, we need to know something about astronomy. I think some of you heard about the so-called precession of equinoxes, especially students who went to my class. If anybody here went to my class, they heard already about this topic. So precession of equinoxes is a very interesting phenomenon, which is a very slow rotation of the Earth. You know that the Earth is rotating around the axis of rotation. But actually the axis of rotation itself is turning. It makes a full circle in approximately 25,800 years. So in this slide I will show you how it works. So this is how this the toy is behaving, right? But this is the corresponding image of the Earth. So here the Earth is shown as like standing still. Actually it rotates around this red axis, but the axis itself is rotating. This movement is very, very slow. As I said, one full circle is about 26,000 years, right? But this is actually a very important phenomenon because it can help us evaluate the time, the date when certain astronomical observation was conducted. If we find in some old book information about observation of stars, we can more or less precisely determine when this observation was done, because it will give us information about the position of the axis of the Earth. So this is another slide from internet. You see that the number is slightly different. Actually, I couldn't find very precise time for rotation. I think that this constant is not really constant, it's changing. But anyways, we can say 26,000 years. So in 26,000 years, the axis of rotation makes the full circle. It means in particular that the starry sky that, for example, Egyptians or Greeks observed some 2,000 years ago, or ancient Chinese observed 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, it looks a little bit different from our starry sky. It's shifted a little bit. Okay, so Newton had this idea. He understood that this is the way to find the dates of certain events. So he paid a lot of attention to the story about these Argonauts. Argonauts, maybe some of you heard about this. This is a group of warriors. It's also Greek mythology, who before the Trojan War, I think that many of you heard about Trojan War, around 1300 years BC, according to traditional, conventional chronology. They went together with Jason, one of the heroes of this war, to this Kolchis or Kolchida, which is located actually in Black Sea. If you know geography, Black Sea is next to Mediterranean Sea. Somewhere near present-day Georgia, ancient Republic of Soviet Union. So people went there to find the so-called Golden Fleece. So it's a well-known story. And their ship was called Argo. So that's why they are called Argonauts. So here is the map showing the location of all these things. So I don't know, I think it moved. So, oh no. No, it's not moved. Okay, so this shows the situation in what is now called Greece, right? And the Black Sea is located here in the right upper corner of this picture. So the Argonauts, they traveled all the way through Aegean Sea to what is called Propontis here, and then they go through Byzantium. You see Byzantium there. They go to the Black Sea and up to find their golden fleece. So here this topic was very popular actually in the Middle Ages. This is one of the beautiful pictures showing the ship of the Argonauts. So this is, as I said, popular topic. Now, how to use this story to find the exact dates? Actually, he's using, again, some astronomical concepts. I apologize for this. Today we have a lot of things coming from astronomy. This precession of the equinoxes, this rotation of the axis of the rotation of the Earth, which I mentioned, is evaluated as 1 degree in approximately 72 years. So using this information, Newton calculated back when the expedition of Argonauts took place, and he used the information shown in this slide because in the moment when he was doing his calculation, certain positions in the sky were, say, at 15 degrees, and at that time when the travel took place, it was in the 8th degree. So difference in these two positions give him the time which passed between these two events. Right? So now, what he exactly suggested. So he, as I said, he made corrections for chronological theories of his time, and some of them were very radical. So he speaks about Egypt. So if we speak about the Pharaoh, the first Pharaoh, well, at that time people believed that it was the first one. Traditional chronology placed the time of his rule in about 3000 BC, so 5,000 years from today, right? Let's see how Newton corrected this date. He said, actually, this Pharaoh ruled in around 946 BC. Of course, for many of you here, you think, oh, this is a long time ago, we don't care, it's the past. But actually, if you look at these numbers, you can be really surprised. This modification, this correction is very big, right? So difference between these dates is more than 2,000 years. So he very radically reduces the Egyptian history. It's no longer as long as we usually imagine. Another case, he takes this Theseus, the mythological king and founder hero of Athens, the man who probably never existed, but people believe that he existed, and he founded the capital of present-day Greece. So you can see here Theseus, and next to him is the goddess Athena, I think, and he is fighting with Minotaurus. So maybe some of you heard about this story. So in traditional chronology, the event, the foundation of Athens, at time of Newton, not now. Now people have different opinion about this event. They believe that it happened in the 15th century BC. What Newton did, he said, no, it's 936 BC. Now the difference is about 600 years. I'm not sure it's... Okay, I will need to check this date. Now, Trojan War. I'm sure that many of you heard about this event because the two famous poems of Homer, the famous Greek poet, were related very much to this event, the War of Troy, right? So in traditional chronology, this event happened in 1225 BC. Newton placed it in about 904 BC. So again, he shifted for about 330 years. It's not so radical as previous shifts, but it's also quite impressive. So more than 3 centuries should be removed. And so on and so forth. So Newton, well, if Newton is just somebody who is, interested in such things, people will not pay attention to him. But this is the great Newton. This is probably the greatest scholar of his time. And the fact that he is focusing on this topic and the fact that he is revising very radically the chronology, of course it will make certain impression on people. People will say, wow, something definitely is interesting here, something maybe indeed is wrong, because such a great mind is doing this work. So, as you probably know, Newton was quite close to the royals, so to speak. Here we can see one of the queens of, well, she became queen when Newton passed away, actually, but he was princess. Her husband was Prince of Wales. Well, it's not, Prince Charles, right? But so it's more or less the same title, but it's not the same guy. So Caroline was one of those women who at that age were very well educated, and more importantly, who was really interested in sciences. Well, at that time, many women in high position were interested in sciences. So she corresponded with Leibniz. So it also belongs to our topic. But we cannot speak much about this correspondence, the exchange of letters between them. She also participated in this particular exchange of letters between Leibniz and Clarke. I don't know if anybody spoke about this in previous lectures. I think somebody did. And this was, again, a very interesting exchange of opinions about philosophy of physics at that time. So it's a princess and later queen who usually is very interested in sciences, and no wonder that Newton spoke to her. This is the same person when she was getting older. Newton mentioned in conversation with her that he works on chronology and trying to revise it. In particular, he mentioned that he is trying to analyze the astronomical observations of ancient authors. Princess was very interested in this. She said, "Oh, please send me your work." So he sent her the work, and he asked her not to communicate it to any other person. He wanted to keep it secret, actually. Well, it may be because of his very particular personality, or maybe because he didn't believe that the work is finished. So it's not very clear. But what happened is that Newton actually sent this information not only to the princess, but also to some other persons. And we will see later what happened. In particular, this man whom you see in this picture, who is usually mentioned as Abbé Conti in French, or his real name was Antonio Schinella Conti. He was called Abbé or Abbot in English. He was actually a very particular person. He was a writer, translator, mathematician, philosopher, and physicist. So you can see that he was younger than Newton, but he was, this is another portrait of him. So he was also very interested in Newton's discovery. So it means that Newton, because he worked for so many years about this, so he from time to time he shared with people his new results. And these results, of course, looked very interesting and important to many people. So this is a statue of the same person, this Conti. So he went to London in 1715 to observe the eclipse of the sun, because sun eclipse can be observed only in some positions, in some locations. It cannot be observed everywhere, like moon eclipse, for example, which is you can see everywhere. But to observe solar eclipse, you need to be in some special places. It can be explained very easily. So he actually was participating in this exchange of letters between Leibniz and Newton, which was a very complex affair. We will not go into it today. So this is a statue in Italy. So Conti was very interested in astronomy, as I probably mentioned, and he even published, in Venice, he published this book about Aurora Borealis. This is, as some of you who study astronomy, you probably know that this is this thing which happens in the near the North Pole, right? This particular light in the sky, and the reasons of it were puzzling for many people of that time. Then, when Conti returned to Paris, he actually gave the text, the draft of Newton, to several people, including this man, whose name was Nicolas Freret, and he translated it into French and added his own observations, his own comments to it. So Freret was also a particular person. You can see that he was interested in such topics, for example, like this one, reflections on the general principles of the art of writing, and especially on the foundations of Chinese writing. C'est pour toi. Tu vois, il a écrit sur l'écriture chinoise. D'accord. Okay. Another one was about general reflections on the study of ancient histories and on the degree of certainty of various historical proofs. You can see from the very title of this work that this is directly related to the topic of Newton, right? He's also interested about the ancient histories. I continue. He wrote a book, again, on ancient nations, general views on the origin and the mixture of the ancient nations, and on the way of studying history. It was published much later. And finally, this work is against Newton, directly against Newton. It's called Defense of the History, based on the monuments of ancient history against the chronological system of Mr. Newton. It was published a long time after Newton's death, so Newton could not read it. But of course, even before that, opinion of Freret was known to Newton. So story gets even more complicated because the translation of the short chronicle, remember the first publication of Newton, into French, at that time it was not published. It came to a bookseller, a book printer actually, whose name was Cavelier, and he wanted to publish it. He found it very interesting, very exciting. The only thing he didn't have was a permission to publish. Permission to publish, he wanted to he wrote to Newton. Actually, I don't really know if he really wrote to Newton or just said that he wrote to Newton. Maybe he wrote, but Newton didn't reply. Newton never replied to this. He didn't say no, he didn't say yes. So after waiting for some time, this Cavelier, he decided to publish it because he really considered it interesting and important, and also as book publisher he believed that he can make money probably. So he wrote to Newton again and said, okay, Mr. Newton, you are not saying anything, I will take it as yes. So I will do it. So he published it, and this is the book, translated into French. So it's all available online, huh? So if you want, you can find it. And then he contacted Newton through some friends. And this, finally, the answer from Newton arrived, and the answer was no. I don't want you to publish it. But it was too late. It was too late. The book was published in Paris, and you can imagine that Newton was very, very angry. So the publisher sent this publication to Newton, and Newton replied. He published a paper in 1725, and he is accusing, actually, this Conti, I mentioned before, that Conti gave this work to publisher. So he's not blaming the publisher, but blaming Conti, actually. So, so the tension was very strong between Newton and his French partners. So then the French scholars, they were interested in this, and one of them, this man whose name was Etienne Soussier, he analyzed the work of Newton, and he published his opinion about this work of Newton. You can see here the publication in 1726. I couldn't find good picture of Soussier. Maybe somebody has it and can give it to me. So Soussier sticks to the traditional chronology. Okay, so he repeats these facts, which at that time were more or less popular, that the year 1 of this world corresponds to 4020 BC. The first man, Adam, died in 1391 BC at age of 930. And all these descendants of Adam, his children, grandchildren, and so on, also died at very advanced age, like 912, 905, 777, and so on. And he also made Egyptian history quite long. So he believed that the first pharaoh of Egypt ruled around 2000 BC. He was cautious to say that it's pharaoh we know, but still. So actually he is trying to correct the Chinese chronology. That's very interesting. At that time, I think French scholars, quite some French scholars, were getting interested more and more in China and all things which happened there. So now we speak about Cassini, another man in this story, and about a solstice. It's the record a little bit strange. He says solstice that Chinese reported about as if having happened in 2342 actually happened in 1852. So he actually solstice happens 2 times every year. So which solstice he is talking about? Maybe he misunderstood and speaking about solar eclipse. So it's not very clear, but to understand this, we need to go to the work of Soussier and Cassini. So here we come to Cassini. I think that Cassini sounds familiar to many of you. Cassini was also a very interesting picture. You can see his portrait here. He was an astronomer, mathematician. He was from Italian origin, but he moved to France and he lived his life in France. Here you can see his portrait showing all the attributes of astronomer, telescoped astronomical instruments, and so on. And maybe many of you heard about Cassini space probe. Cassini space probe, which was launched in 1997 and still flying somewhere in space. So it was named after this astronomer. So this is the space probe passing by Saturn. All right. So I think somebody knows about this probe, maybe many people. So Soussier was very much interested in China and Chinese astronomy, and here we come to works of this man, Antoine Gobil, a Jesuit, who was also a scholar and person interested in astronomy. And you can see here that together Saussure and Gobil produced this book in 1729. It's all about the same time when all these events were happening, actually. Newton was already dead, but still people were very interested in chronology, not only of Western world, but also of other parts of the world. So this book includes the word chronology. It was devoted to Chinese chronology, and it was based on the works of the fathers of the Society of Jesuits, Society of Jesus, so the Jesuits. So here we can see a portrait of this man, Antoine Gobil, who published a book about mathematical, astronomical, geographical, and chronological, and also physical observations. And here you can see in small letters the name of Saussure. So Gobil, who lived in China for a long time and died in Beijing, he is shown in this picture with his astronomical instruments. So the book was a collection of studies and reports made by Jesuits in China. And the first 100 pages provided details of observations of Gobil and his partners in China, especially about eclipses and other astronomical events. So actually it was very interesting materials to analyze and try to understand Chinese history. Well, anyways, in this book they don't speak about Chinese history, but they speak about history of Chinese astronomy instead. But here there is a work of Cassini, who was working on Chinese chronology. So he understood that something can be done to verify, to test the Chinese chronology as well. So it was, this book was in, this paper was included in a book, which was a collection of papers edited by this person, Simon de Dalubert, who was a kind of envoy, extraordinary envoy of King of France sent to Thailand. So he was a mathematician and also a friend of Leibniz, here we see Leibniz again, and Cassini. So all these people, they form some very interesting network, actually. They work together, they communicate, they send letters, they think about the same problems. So it's a very interesting time. So here they started exploring the information found in Chinese sources. So they found that, for example, Chinese astronomers speak about conjunction of planets. Conjunction of planets means that all the 5 visible planets are located more or less in the same part of the sky. They are very close to each other. And Chinese astronomers supposedly speak about some conjunction which took place in 2000 something BC, but actually it happened, according to calculation of Western astronomers, only 500 years later. So it means that dates for Chinese astronomy or Chinese history, dates for Chinese history also should be corrected. So it's, we can say that we can feel some influence of Newton here, of Newton's ideas about verification of history using astronomical data. I don't know if any modern historians can really see this. They see usually this is kind of independent study. So here again Cassini works on mythical Emperor Yao, and he gives different dates for him. Again, difference is about 500 years, the same shift for 5 centuries. So it's not impossible that the methods of Cassini actually was because Cassini worked earlier, and maybe Cassini's ideas influenced Newton, who in turn applied this method to materials coming from a different region. So coming back to Saussure's critique of Newton. So Saussure was very systematic. He divided his remarks into 5 parts, which he called dissertations. and he disagreed with Newton. He gave all different kinds of arguments. First, he tried to fight against the astronomical proof of Newton. He tried to give some historical arguments. He used some supplementary materials against Newton's dating. And he was, especially the fifth part was very long, he addressed Newton's response to the critique of Abrégé, I think one word is missing, and advanced his own theory. So he was focused on some particular technical issue, which is location of the cardinal points. So here Newton felt under attack, and he worked actively on the long version of his book, which I mentioned in the beginning, but he never published it during his lifetime. Lifetime ended in 1727, and the full book was published only in 1728. So here you can see the French edition, published in also 1728. And here you see the English edition, published in London. It's publication of the two works, the full work and the short work. So, so this work contains several parts, which begins with, of course, some letters to the Queen, to relatives, important people, and so on. And then goes the short chronicle, and then after that there are 6 chapters which explore the chronology of several different civilizations. So here you can see the list of these chapters. So you can see that he begins with Greece, he goes to Egypt, he goes to Assyrian Empire, to Babylon, and then he is focusing on this very particular topic, Temple of Solomon, which is... C'est fini?
Non, il y a encore beaucoup.
Je ne sais pas. Il est à quelle heure là?
Il est 8h.
À quelle heure il faut que...
Non, tu dois terminer maintenant.
Maintenant? Oh. So problem with chronology is not only at that time but also now, because it seems that I can finish right away. So here you can see that this again, this work covers the chronologies of countries located in the near Mediterranean Sea. So here I have some large portion of the text, and I will probably, so it's about actually people whom Newton criticized, because people who created the chronology which we are using until now, the chronology was created by some individuals, for example this one, a French Jesuit theologian whose name was Denis Petot, and he worked, as you can see, on chronology. So he worked on this topic about 1 century, well, a little bit less than 1 century before Newton. The other person was this French scholar whose name was Scaliger. Sometimes he's read in German way Scaliger, but we can read him Scaliger. And he was also very interested in restoration of chronology. So we can say very roughly that chronology of ancient world was created or reconstructed by these two individuals. They, not only by them, but they played important role. So here we can see the work of Scaliger, and they also used cycles of sun and the moon, astronomical things, to build their chronologies. What happened to Newton? Some people supported him. So here is the list of people who supported his reconstruction, but the number of, including this one, who published this book in support of Newton, but there were much more people who were against the reconstruction of Newton. You can see here only a small list, a small part of the list of people who were against his reconstruction. So these things you can read more or less. They were described by some historians recently, and not very recently by this historian Manuel, who published Isaac Newton Historian, and in particular this monograph published by two scholars, Newton and the Origin of Civilization, published by Buchwald and Feingold. The arguments in Newton's chronology was also very recently explored by Belgian quite young lady whose name is Yael Nazé, and she provided very technical, very detailed analysis of Newton astronomical dating from the viewpoint of present-day astronomy. And here is the last slide, which is, I show you some men whom you all know. And he said, Newton's writings on biblical subjects seem to me especially interesting because they provide deep insight into the characteristic intellectual features and working methods of this important man. The divine origin of the Bible is for Newton absolutely certain, a conviction that stands in curious contrast to the critical skepticism that characterizes his attitude toward the churches. So this explains partly why Newton tries so hard to adjust chronology to make it fit into biblical history. And here's the picture which I like very much, is portrait of Isaac Newton as a young boy with his dog. You can see the Tsinghua students like dogs, so student also was the same kind of person. So and the last phrase, which maybe you heard many times here, but I think it also explains his attitude. I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. So thank you for your attention.